I stood on the bridge of the USS Indianapolis, the vast expanse of the Pacific, stretching in all directions under a sky so dark it seemed to absorb the very light from the stars. The night was thick, oppressive, as if the weight of the mission we had just completed clung to the air around us. We had delivered the components for a weapon that would end the war, at least that's what they told us. But as I stared into the void of the ocean, a gnawing sense of unease took root in my gut. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched, hunted even. The sea, normally a source of solace for me, now felt alien, hostile. It was as if the ocean itself resented our presence, waiting for the opportune moment to drag us into its depths. The men sensed it too. There was an unspoken dread that clung to the air like the oppressive humidity. I tried to focus on my duties, but the thought of what we had carried haunted me. What had we unleashed upon the world? And more importantly, what had we invited upon ourselves? My thoughts were interrupted by the shrill cry of the watchman. The next few moments were a blur of chaos and terror. The explosion rocked the ship and I was thrown to the deck. The wind knocked from my lungs. My ship shuddered as the torpedoes struck her belly, her metallic groan like the death knell of some ancient leviathan. The lights flickered, and then darkness enveloped us, the screams of my men mingling with the roar of the sea. We were sinking, and fast. I scrambled to my feet, barking orders, trying to maintain some semblance of control, but the Indianapolis was already doomed. The crew, more than 1,000 strong, fought to abandon ship, but the sea was eager to claim us. I saw men thrown into the water, swallowed by the waves, and as I leaped over the railing, I felt the cold, unforgiving embrace of the ocean. The ship was gone, and we were adrift, scattered across the vastness of the Philippine Sea. The Indianapolis had vanished beneath the waves, leaving nothing but darkness and the desperate cries of my men. Then, silence. A silence so profound it felt as though the world itself had ended. Time lost all meaning as we floated in the endless sea. There were over 800 of us in the water at first, but our numbers dwindled with each passing hour. We clung to life, forming groups around floater nets, tying ourselves together with life vests to keep from drifting apart. Those who were lucky enough to have a raft shared it, rotating time on the few we had. But there was no escaping the relentless sun, the salt that cracked our lips and burned our eyes, or the gnawing thirst that consumed our minds. And then I saw them, dorsal fins, slicing through the water like knives. The sea had become a graveyard, and the sharks were its gravediggers, patiently circling, waiting for the inevitable. The first attack came in the early hours of the morning. I was drifting, half asleep, when I heard a scream, sharp and sudden, that cut through the silence like a blade. I jerked awake, my heart pounding, and saw a man thrashing in the water just a few feet away, his skin blistered from the sun, his eyes wide with terror. He was delirious, babbling incoherently about home, about his mother's apple pie. The fin appeared behind him, and before I could even shout a warning, the water erupted in a froth of red. His scream was cut short, his body dragged beneath the waves, leaving nothing but ripples and the faint scent of blood in the air. I watched, paralyzed, unable to comprehend what had just happened. Then chaos. The men around me began to panic, splashing and shouting, trying to push themselves closer to the rafts, closer to anything that might offer safety. But there was no safety, no refuge from these reapers that stalked us. The sharks were patient, and they knew we belonged to them. As the sun rose, the full horror of our situation became clear. The water was dotted with bits of debris, life preservers, and the lifeless bodies of those who hadn't survived the night. The men who were still alive were huddled together, their faces pale with fear, their eyes wide and unblinking. We were all waiting for the next attack. They circled us, their dorsal fins cutting through the water like the blades of scythes. Waiting for that next moment when the water would erupt in blood and screams. By the third day, there were only a few of us left in my group. The others had either drowned, died from their wounds, or been devoured. Those who remained raved about monsters in the deep, about sins unatoned. And as the hours dragged on, I began to wonder if they were right. The sharks weren't just hunting us, they were judging us, enacting a slow, methodical punishment for the sins we had committed. But what sins? Was it the war, the mission? The sea seemed alive with malevolent intent. I felt it in my bones, a cold certainty that we were not alone in those waters. My men who died weren't just consumed by the sharks, they weren't just taken, they were punished. It was during the night of that third day that I experienced the most horrifying moment of all. I was floating near one of the rafts, my body too weak to do more than drift, when I felt it. A bump against my leg, something solid, something large. My heart froze in my chest. I didn't move, didn't breathe, as another bump came, this time against my side. I glanced down and saw the shadow of a shark beneath me, its massive form gliding through the water, so close I could have reached out and touched it. I thought I was done for, but the shark didn't attack. It just circled, its cold, dead eyes staring up at me, as if deciding whether I was worth the effort. I could feel the panic rising in me, but there was nothing I could do. I was at its mercy. After what felt like an eternity, it moved away, leaving me shaking, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The next morning, the planes came. Rescue had arrived at last, but it was too late for so many. The few of us who were still alive were pulled from the water, our bodies barely able to stand the shock of being back on solid ground. But even as they dragged me aboard, even as they poured water down my throat and wrapped me in blankets, I knew I had left something of myself behind in that sea. In the days that followed, as I lay in a hospital bed, the memories would not leave me. The other survivors spoke of sharks, of madness, but none could describe the horror of knowing that the sea itself had judged us, had taken what it was owed, and let the rest of us go, not out of mercy, but because we were no longer worth the effort. And now, safe on dry land, I am haunted still. The sea calls to me in my dreams, a siren song that promises rest in the eternal darkness of the abyss. I know that one day I will answer that call. I will return to the sea, to the sharks, to the judgment that awaits me in the depths, for I have seen the abyss and I know that it stares back.